With a slow, methodical precision, she ground the bone into a fine powder and sprinkled it into her stew. Her large hands moved as though this was the most natural thing in the world. Once upon a time, in the hidden village of Akoto, there lived a woman named Nsia. She was well known in the village for her cooking, but it wasn't just her food that drew people to her. Nsia was a large, round woman with wide hips, full breasts, and a warm, inviting smile that made people feel safe and comforted. She had an amiable face that seemed always at ease, though her large, rotund frame moved with surprising grace as she worked in her small kitchen. Nsia's meals were legendary. No one in Akoto could rival the richness of her stews, the tenderness of her meats, or the soft, fragrant bread she baked. People from nearby villages often traveled to Akoto just to experience her cooking, and she was at the heart of every village feast and celebration. Yet, despite her cheerful demeanor, there was always something about Nsia that made the villagers uneasy. She never ate her own food. They also noticed that Nsia, though she had been in the village for many years, never seemed to age. Her face remained unchanged, as if unbothered or untouched by time, and her plump figure was just as round and firm as it had been when she first arrived. Whispers began to circulate, rumors that perhaps Nsia was hiding something, but no one dared question her. How could they, when her food brought them so much joy? One rainy season, a stranger named Kwame arrived in Akoto. He was an elder from a distant village, traveling to trade stories and tales with the people of Akoto. As he settled into the village, Kwame quickly heard of Nsia's renowned cooking, and curiosity led him to her door. When he first saw her, however, a strange feeling stirred inside him. There was something familiar about her face, though he couldn't quite place it. Her large motherly figure and the way she moved reminded him of someone, a distant memory tugging at the edges of his mind. He watched her closely during the feast that night, his unease growing with each bite he took of her delicious food. The villagers laughed and feasted around him, oblivious to the strange thoughts circling in Kwame's head. As he ate, the memory finally clicked into place. Kwame had heard stories of Nsia from his own village, a woman who had died under tragic circumstances. Nsia had been married to a jealous, possessive man who, in a fit of rage, had ended her life. He remembered hearing the tale when he was much younger, and he had always wondered what had become of her spirit. But now, seeing her here, alive, or so it seemed, Kwame felt a chill run down his spine. How could this be? He muttered under his breath. He needed proof. His mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps she was not the same Nsia. Perhaps it was a coincidence. Or maybe, just maybe, she was something not entirely of this world. Over the next few days, Kwame quietly observed her. He noticed how, despite her warmth and constant smile, there was an eerie stillness to her, especially when she was alone. She never seemed to tire, even as she worked long hours preparing food. And her eyes, there was something in her eyes, something distant, as if she wasn't truly present. One evening, Kwame decided to confront her. He waited until the village had gone to sleep and approached her kitchen just as she was preparing for the next day's meals. The warm glow of the fire flickered against the mud walls as Nsia, humming softly to herself, stirred a large pot of stew. Kwame watched from the shadows as she worked, and just when he thought to speak, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Nsia reached into her robes and pulled out a long, brittle bone, human bone. With a slow, methodical precision, she ground the bone into a fine powder and sprinkled it into her stew. Her large hands moved as though this was the most natural thing in the world, her wide hips swaying as she stirred the mixture with a wooden spoon. Then she reached for a small bowl of thick, dark blood and added it to the pot. watching the liquid swirl into the stew as if it were an ingredient no different than salt or pepper. Kwame stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen enough. He had to tell someone. He had to stop her. But the question that gnawed at him most was why? Why would she do this? Why use such horrifying ingredients in her meals? And then it dawned on him. Nsia was just not any spirit. She had never passed on. She was still tethered to the world of the living, using her own decaying body, her bones and blood to keep herself connected to those around her. But how could he make the villagers believe him? They adored Nsia. They worshipped her cooking. He needed proof, and more than that, he needed someone who knew her as he did, someone who could confirm her true identity. Kwame traveled back to his home village, searching for the one man who could recognize Nsia, the man responsible for her death, her husband. When Kwame found him, he was an older, broken man, his face lined with guilt and sorrow. "You must come with me," Kwame said urgently. "There is something you need to see." The man resisted at first, unwilling to revisit the ghost of his past, literally. But Kwame was persistent, and eventually the man agreed to return to Akoto with him. When they arrived, Kwame brought the man to one of Nsia's feasts. The man's face drained of color when he saw her, standing in the middle of the village, smiling warmly as she served her famous stew. It can't be," he whispered. "She's dead. Kwame cut him off. "I know what you did, and I know what she became, but I need you to prove it." Reluctantly, the man sat down at the table. His hands trembled as Nsia approached with a bowl of steaming stew. Her large frame seemed even more imposing now, and her round body casting long shadows into the firelight. She smiled at him, but her eyes, those distant, knowing eyes, betrayed her recognition. "Eat," she said softly, placing the bowl in front of him. The man hesitated, his hands shaking as he lifted the spoon to his mouth. The stew tasted just as he remembered, rich, flavorful, and strangely familiar. But as soon as he swallowed, something terrible began to happen. Nsia's body started to flicker. Her wide hips, her large arms, and her full breasts seemed to dissolve before their very eyes, turning to dust. The villagers gasped and screamed in shock as they watched her once solid figure crumble, piece by piece, into nothing. Her voice, once so warm and soothing, grew faint as she spoke her final words. "I only wanted to be remembered." But as Nsia disappeared, many somethings happened. Her husband, too, began to fade. His body shuddered as if something unseen was pulling him away. The villagers watched in horror as he struggled to stand, but his legs gave way beneath him. He gasped for air, his face twisted in terror, but it was too late. He too crumbled into dust, vanishing alongside the woman he had betrayed so many years ago. The village fell silent. Kwame stood frozen, unable to process what he had just witnessed. Nsia had finally found her peace, but it had come at a terrible cost. For her husband, too, was bound to her fate. They had been tied together in life by love and hate, and now in death they were bound once more. From that day on, the village of Akoto changed. The memory of Nsia's cooking lingered, but the villagers no longer spoke of her. Her kitchen remained untouched, her pots and pans gathering dust as the years passed. And though her food had brought them joy for so long, they could never forget the truth that had been revealed. The past has a way of binding us, no matter how far we run or how much we try to forget. Betrayal, guilt, and unresolved pain can linger like ghosts, waiting for the moment to return. Sometimes it is only by facing the darkest parts of our past that we can find peace, and only then can we truly be free. Thank you so much for watching Sankofa Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale from the past. See you in the next story. Bye!